Chicago. A city built on steel, sweat, and guys who asked very uncomfortable questions. Back in the day, if somebody owed money, skipped out on a debt, or suddenly forgot how to speak English when the boss asked a question, well, let's just say the Chicago outfit had a system. Now you can bring a little of that legendary problem-solving power into your own home. Introducing the Chicago Outfit Truth Extraction Kit. That's right. For the low price of 3 easy payments of $19.29, because around here we respect tradition, you'll receive everything you need to turn any awkward conversation into a full confession. Inside every kit you'll find the Cicero conversation chair. Comfortable, sturdy, and positioned directly under the bright light of truth. The deluxe rubber hose. Perfect for encouraging honesty at family poker games. And of course, the Chicago Outfit Ledger Notebook. Because when somebody says they'll pay you tomorrow, you write that down. But wait, there's more. Order now and we'll include the emergency alibi generator. Just spin the wheel and instantly receive a classic Chicago excuse like, I was at church. I was with my cousin Tony. I never even heard of that guy. Or the all-time favorite. What murder? Thousands of satisfied customers are already talking. Mostly because the kit works. So the next time someone tells you, I swear, I don't know nothing, just smile, lean in close. And remember what Chicago taught us all. Everybody talks eventually. The Chicago Outfit Truth Extraction Kit. Available now. Exclusively from Pizzaverse Studios and Palermo Productions. Because sometimes you gotta solve problems. Chicago style.
Elizabeth Taylor, Hollywood, the outfit, and the flight that burned the debt. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Half the world bowed at Elizabeth Taylor's feet, but the life of the Queen of Hollywood rested in the hands of Chicago's devil, Sam Giancana. The extravagant wealth funding her marriage was tethered to a shadow ledger that demanded repayment in blood and absolute compliance. When the private jet exploded in the freezing sky, America mourned a weather-related accident, but the underworld knew better. It was the Mafia's perfect debt collection tactic. Sam Giancana had placed Elizabeth Taylor in that flying coffin to burn a blood debt. The most valuable actress on the planet only missed that doomed flight because her body temperature suddenly spiked, keeping her grounded while the debt was collected. But long before she became human collateral in a syndicate execution, she had to be manufactured into an asset worth killing for. Born on February 27, 1932, in London, Taylor was bred for the spotlight. The Hollywood studio system manufactured her into an icon of pristine royalty. The machinery of 1950s Hollywood was fueled by dark capital. The studios projected innocence while taking loans from monsters. The industry empires were built on celluloid, but the foundation was concrete poured by organized crime. Unions were controlled by the mob. Distribution routes were taxed by the mob. Hollywood was a company town, and the Chicago outfit held a controlling stake. The man who borrowed from monsters. Mike Todd navigated this treacherous landscape with reckless arrogance. Born Avrom Hirsch Goldbogen on June 22, 1909, he was a theatrical producer who operated on sheer bravado. He was a promoter who sold empty air and collected hard cash. His entire existence was a confidence trick. He needed a prop to convince the world of his legitimacy. Elizabeth Taylor became that prop. Taylor possessed a beauty that commanded entire economies. She was the most valuable asset in the film industry. Todd's approach to their relationship mirrored his business deals, overwhelming, aggressive, and entirely funded by questionable loans. Rather than a self-made titan, Mike Todd was a compulsive gambler operating on terrifying deficits, frequenting high-stakes tables controlled by figures like Meyer Lansky. He routinely placed bets that could bankrupt small studios. He treated the Chicago underworld as an open vault, pulling heavy loans to sustain his high-roller facade. When producing around the world in 80 days, Todd bypassed legitimate studio backing, entirely funding the massive project directly with syndicate money to feed his relentless ambition. The bosses opened their vaults because Todd promised massive returns. He signed a deadly bargain. The Mafia acted as his personal blood bank. They lent him the fame and the capital, and they expected repayment with brutal interest. The ledger. Meyer Lansky kept meticulous ledgers. The numbers next to Todd's name grew exponentially. Lansky reported to the Chicago bosses. Sam Giancana took a personal interest in the Hollywood producer who refused to pay. Giancana was a brutal tactician. He did not care about Oscars or red carpets. He cared about the bottom line and the principle of fear. If one man was allowed to walk away from a mob debt, the entire system of fear would collapse. Todd became an existential threat to their business model. The film swept the Academy Awards. It generated a massive fortune. The Chicago outfit expected an immediate payout. Sam Giancana sent his collectors. Mike Todd made a fatal miscalculation. The success of the film provided Todd with the liquidity to clear his ledger. Choosing arrogance over survival, Todd ignored the mob's ultimatums. Instead, he doubled down on his own myth, throwing lavish, multi-continental parties, including a grotesque display of wealth at Madison Square Garden, where 18,000 guests were served champagne and caviar on national television. Sam Giancana watched from Chicago. He watched the man who owed him millions wasting cash on elephants and marching bands. In the syndicate's ecosystem, a neglected debt of that magnitude was a dangerous liability. Elizabeth Taylor as human collateral. Todd, however, behaved as if his high-profile marriage made him untouchable. He paraded Taylor through casinos and premieres, seemingly using her intense fame as a shield against his creditors. He calculated that the outfit would never risk the apocalyptic federal blowback of harming America's most famous actress. The diamonds he fastened around her neck, purchased with dirty money, unknowingly bound her to the very men who were losing patience with his arrogance. He dragged her to every meeting, every casino, every late-night dinner with men who had dead eyes and bulging jackets. He was gambling with her life every single day. She was completely unaware of the invisible crosshairs tracking their every movement. She thought she was living a magnificent adventure. She was actually trapped inside a highly lucrative kill zone. Todd believed his own press clippings. He thought he had outsmarted the smartest criminals in the country. He continued to plan his next grand entrance, unaware that the men in the tailored suits had already signed his death warrant. He operated with the blinding arrogance of an untouchable mogul, deliberately ignoring the armed collectors tightening the net around his daily operations. The flying coffin. The mob planners were meticulous. They began to track his movements. They monitored his flight schedules. They knew Todd traveled exclusively on his private plane. The Lockheed Lodestar was a symbol of his independence. It was also his greatest vulnerability. A private plane is a fragile machine. It operates in extreme conditions. A subtle mechanical failure leaves no fingerprints. It leaves no witnesses. The Chicago outfit dispatched their specialists. They did not need hitmen with submachine guns. They needed mechanics. They needed men who understood pressure valves, fuel lines, and de-icing systems. For decades, underworld rumors suggested the crash was not an unavoidable tragedy of physics and altitude, but a meticulously planned assassination. The hangar was dark and quiet. The Lockheed Lodestar sat on the concrete floor like a dormant metal beast. The name The Lucky Liz was painted on the fuselage. It was a declaration of ownership and a taunt to the fates. The Chicago outfit did not believe in luck. They believed in leverage, mechanics, and physics. A man in grease-stained overalls walked under the wings of the aircraft. He carried a small tool roll. He was not a hitman with a wire garrote. He was a specialist. He understood altitude, barometric pressure, and freezing points. He knew the flight path to New York required the aircraft to climb over the treacherous Zuni Mountains of New Mexico. According to Mafia lore, a specialist tampered with the de-icing system and the cabin heater exhaust. While official reports blamed the extreme weather, the criminal underworld whispered that the mob left nothing to chance. They theorized that the system was rigged to hold pressure on the ground, but failed catastrophically under the strain of freezing altitudes. The machine was now a flying coffin waiting for its occupant. The fever that saved her. Mike Todd spent his final days entirely consumed by his own hubris. He was bleeding cash, yet he continued to throw it away. He was scheduled to fly to New York to be the guest of honor at a Friars Club roast. The roast was the ultimate validation of his ego. It was a room full of powerful men paying tribute to his genius. He needed to be there. He ignored the threatening phone calls. He ignored the men parked in dark sedans outside his Beverly Hills estate. He naively believed that his marriage to America's biggest star made him politically untouchable. He truly believed Sam Giancana would never authorize a hit on a plane carrying Elizabeth Taylor. Todd was using his 26-year-old wife as human collateral. He mandated her presence on the flight. She was packing her trunks, eager to accompany him. She was deeply infatuated with the bombastic producer. She confused his suffocating, possessive control for passionate devotion. Unaware of the mechanical sabotage, she packed her trunks, fully expecting to board a flight she would never have survived. The assassination plot hinged on her presence. The mob strategists had calculated the risk. Killing America's sweetheart was bad for business, but letting Mike Todd walk away from a multi-million-dollar debt destroyed the very foundation of their power. The decision was cold and mathematical. The debt outweighed the risk. Taylor was acceptable collateral damage. Then biology overrode the Mafia's calculus. On March 21st, the temperature in Los Angeles dropped. Taylor felt a sudden deep chill. The chill rapidly escalated into a violently high fever. A microscopic virus entered her respiratory system and multiplied with brutal efficiency. Her immune system reacted. Her body temperature skyrocketed to 103 degrees. Sweat soaked her silk sheets. She developed a severe case of bronchitis. She coughed until she tasted blood. Her lungs rattled with every breath. She begged Todd to let her fly. She demanded to be carried onto the plane on a stretcher. The doctor arrived and issued a stern, non-negotiable warning. Flying in an unpressurized cabin over high mountain ranges with severe bronchitis was suicidal. The altitude and the pressure changes would rupture her eardrums and potentially collapse her lungs. She was physically incapable of boarding the aircraft. Todd walked out alone. He stepped directly into the trap. The night flight. Todd arrived at the Burbank airport. He brought his biographer, Art Cohn. Cohn was writing a book about Todd's spectacular life. He was there to document the triumph. He was actually there to document the end. Todd also brought his personal pilot, Bill Werner, and his co-pilot, Tom Barkley. The four men walked across the dark tarmac toward the waiting Lodestar. Men sitting in a parked car near the perimeter fence watched the boarding process. They held a pair of binoculars. They watched Todd climb the metal stairs. They looked for the famous woman with the violet eyes. She did not appear. The hitmen noted her absence. They felt a brief moment of professional relief. The job was now clean. There would be no apocalyptic federal crackdown. There would only be the death of a degenerate gambler and 3 unfortunate bystanders. They watched the heavy cabin door swing shut and latch. They watched the twin propellers cough and spin into a blur. They listened to the roar of the engines. They knew the exact barometric pressure required to trigger the sabotage. They watched the Lucky Liz taxi down the runway and lift into the night sky. The hit was officially in motion. The Zuni Mountains. The weather reports for the flight path were grim. A massive storm front was moving across the American Southwest. A heavy curtain of freezing rain and snow blanketed the mountains of New Mexico. It was a pilot's nightmare. It was the Mafia's dream. Inside the cabin, Mike Todd poured a drink. Surrounded by the hum of the engines miles above the earth, he felt entirely untouchable. He sat in his custom leather seat, reviewing his itinerary and upcoming movie deals. Completely unaware that the compromised valves outside were already failing under the extreme pressure of the altitude, and that the tampered heater exhaust was slowly pumping odorless carbon monoxide into the cockpit. The aircraft climbed higher to clear the approaching mountain ranges. The temperature outside the thin aluminum hull plummeted well below freezing. The storm front hit them over New Mexico. The turbulence was violent. The plane shook aggressively. Ice began to accumulate on the leading edges of the wings. It formed a thick, heavy crust. The aerodynamic lift of the aircraft was immediately compromised. The plane began to feel sluggish. It started to lose altitude. Pilot Bill Werner recognized the danger instantly. He reached for the pneumatic de-icing controls. He flipped the switch. Nothing happened. The compromised valve failed under the extreme pressure. The lines held no air. The rubber boots remained flat and frozen. The ice continued to build at a terrifying rate. The weight dragged the nose of the plane down. The engines strained against the overwhelming drag. The carbon monoxide leaking from the tampered heater had already begun to dull their reflexes. Their heads pounded. Their vision blurred. They were fighting a crippled machine with poisoned minds. The plane was dropping. It was falling out of the sky. The altimeter unwound violently as the Zuni Mountains rushed up to meet them in the dark. The pilots pulled back on the controls with all their fading strength, but the ice was too heavy and the mechanical failure was absolute. The Lucky Liz clipped the tops of the pine trees. The impact ripped the right wing from the fuselage, spraying aviation fuel into the freezing air before slamming into the rocky ground at hundreds of miles per hour. Sparks ignited the vaporized fuel. A massive fireball illuminated the snowy mountainside. The aircraft was incinerated. The evidence was consumed. The debt was collected. The morning after, Elizabeth Taylor lay in her bed in Beverly Hills. She was sweating through her fever. Her chest ached. She was entirely unaware that the man she loved was currently burning on a mountainside. She did not know her sudden illness had just spared her from the exact same fiery execution. At dawn, search and rescue teams hiked through freezing mud and dense pine forest. They smelled the crash before they saw it. The odor of melted aluminum, scorched earth, and incinerated flesh hung heavy in the frigid morning air. They expected to find a plane crash. They found a crematorium. The impact had scattered debris over a vast area, but the core of the aircraft was completely pulverized. The investigators sifted through smoking ash. They were looking for bodies. They found fragments. The authorities needed positive identification. They found a melted lump of gold in the ash. It was a wedding ring. It was the only tangible proof that Mike Todd had been in that metal tube. The news in Beverly Hills. The news traveled faster than the storm front, hitting the wires and reaching Los Angeles before sunrise. In the Beverly Hills mansion, Elizabeth Taylor was fighting her fever. The bronchitis kept her bedridden. The telephone rang. A frantic voice on the other end delivered the blunt reality. The Lucky Liz was gone. Mike Todd was dead. When the news reached Bel Air, the devastation was immediate and absolute. Taylor collapsed. The fever and the shock overwhelmed her nervous system. She had to be sedated. The doctor who had forbidden her from flying the day before now administered heavy tranquilizers to keep her heart from giving out. The media descended on the estate. They camped outside the iron gates. They wanted photographs of the grieving goddess. They wanted the tears. They wanted the tragedy. They spun the narrative immediately. It was a heartbreaking tale of star-crossed lovers torn apart by cruel fate. The public wept for the young widow. The newspapers printed endless columns about the unpredictable dangers of private aviation and the brutal winter storms of New Mexico. In Chicago, the newspapers were read in quiet rooms. Sam Giancana sat at a table. He read the headlines. He did not weep. He poured a cup of coffee. The ledger was balanced. The weather story. The Civil Aeronautics Board launched an immediate investigation. Federal inspectors flew to New Mexico. They hiked up the mountain. They poked at the melted aluminum. They looked at the weather data. The storm had been severe. The icing conditions were documented. The investigators drafted their reports. They concluded that severe icing had dragged the plane down. They concluded that the pilots had become disoriented in the storm. It was a clean, neat, bureaucratic explanation. It satisfied the press. It satisfied the insurance companies. It satisfied the public. It also satisfied the Mafia. The outfit had relied on the predictability of the federal bureaucracy. Investigators look for obvious failures. They do not look for microscopic crimps in pneumatic lines destroyed by fire. They do not look for tampered exhaust manifolds melted into slag. The perfect murder uses the environment as the weapon and the government as the alibi. The cab closed the file. The case of the Lucky Liz was officially an act of God. The widow understands. Elizabeth Taylor remained locked inside her bedroom. The sedatives dulled the sharp edges of the panic, but the underlying terror began to surface. She was not a naive girl. She had lived with Mike Todd. She had seen the men he associated with. She had seen the briefcases of cash. She had heard the frantic, whispered phone calls in the middle of the night. She knew he gambled. She knew he owed money to men who did not use collection agencies. The pieces of the puzzle began to snap together. Todd had been desperate. He had been reckless. He had flaunted his wealth while dodging his creditors. And then his plane falls out of the sky, a plane maintained by top mechanics, a plane flown by a highly experienced pilot who knew how to handle ice. The timing was too perfect. The destruction was too complete. She looked at the massive diamond ring on her nightstand, the ring Todd had given her, the ring bought with borrowed Mafia money. The glittering stone suddenly looked like a target. She realized how close she had come. She had packed her bags. She had fought to get on that plane. The men who brought down that plane did not care if she was on it. Her fame was not a shield. Her beauty was not protection. To the Chicago outfit, she was just a passenger. She was collateral damage. Silence as survival. This realization triggered a profound psychological shift. The grief over her husband morphed into a raw, paralyzing fear for her own life. She was a widow, but she was also a hostage who had just witnessed her captor's execution. She knew too much. She knew about the debts. She knew the names. If she spoke out, if she demanded a deeper investigation, if she hinted at foul play, she would become a liability. The Hollywood studio executives circled the grieving widow. They sent flowers. They sent condolences. They were anxious. Taylor was their biggest asset. A grieving widow sold tickets. A murdered widow halted production. The studio bosses also knew the score. They knew who really ran the town. Nobody asked questions about Mike Todd's plane crash. Nobody pushed the federal investigators. The entire industry engaged in a collective act of willful blindness. Taylor was forced to participate in the charade. She had to play the tragic heroine. She had to weep for the cameras and talk about her broken heart. She could never show the terror. She had to swallow the truth and bury it deep inside her chest. The Code of Omerta was not just for Sicilian mobsters. It was forced upon the Queen of Hollywood. Silence was the price of her continued existence. The funeral in Chicago. The funeral for Mike Todd was a media circus. It was held at Waldheim Cemetery in Chicago. The location itself was a brutal final statement. Todd was being buried in the exact city where the men who ordered his execution operated. Thousands of fans mobbed the cemetery. Police held back screaming crowds. Taylor arrived heavily veiled, supported by her doctor and her brother. She could barely walk. The flashbulbs blinded her. She stood by the open grave and looked at the closed casket. There was nothing inside but ash and a melted ring. She looked at the faces in the crowd. Among the weeping fans and the studio executives, there were other men. Men in dark suits and fedoras. Men who did not weep. Men who watched the proceedings with cold, calculating eyes. Representatives of the Chicago outfit. They were there to confirm the burial. They were there to close the file. Taylor felt their eyes on her. They were watching her. They were waiting to see if she would break the code. The horror of the situation was absolute. She was Elizabeth Taylor. She commanded millions of dollars per film. She had the adoration of the entire globe. Yet standing over her husband's grave, she was entirely powerless. She realized that her entire life of luxury and privilege was a fragile illusion allowed to exist only by the grace of violent men. The studio system owned her image. The underworld owned her reality. The studio calls her back. The heavy iron gates of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer lot swung open. The black limousine rolled through the archway. The tires crunched on the gravel. Elizabeth Taylor sat in the back seat and stared out the tinted window. The world outside was bright and sunny. The world inside the car was freezing. Only weeks had passed since the explosion in the Zuni Mountains. The studio had demanded her return. They cited the production schedule. They cited the budget. They did not cite the massive unspoken pressure from the men who financed the distribution networks. She stepped out of the car. A group of studio executives stood waiting. They wore dark suits. They wore solemn expressions. They offered condolences. They were lying. They did not care about her dead husband. They cared about the box office projections. A grieving widow was a highly marketable commodity. A tragic romance sold tickets. They ushered her toward the sound stage. The dressing room was a brightly lit cage. The makeup artist descended upon her. They applied thick layers of foundation. They hid the dark circles under her violet eyes. They painted over the pale, sickly pallor of her skin. She stared at her reflection. The face belonged to a movie star. The eyes belonged to a hostage. She opened a small pillbox on the vanity. She swallowed a Seconal. She chased it with a glass of water. The barbiturate dulled the sharp edges of the panic. She needed the drugs to stand under the blinding studio lights without screaming. The set of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was oppressive. The script demanded she play Maggie the Cat, a desperate woman fighting for financial survival in a house built entirely on lies and manipulation. The parallels were exact. She was not acting. She was purging terror. The ghost's debts. She returned to the Bel Air mansion at night. The massive house was silent. The silence was worse than the noise of the studio. She looked at the extravagant possessions Mike Todd had accumulated, the modern art, the antique furniture, the custom suits hanging in the closet. It all looked like a stage set. The illusion shattered completely when Todd's lawyers arrived at the estate. They brought heavy leather briefcases. They spread ledgers and financial documents across the polished mahogany table. They explained the reality of the estate. The reality was catastrophic. Mike Todd was a phantom. His billions did not exist. His wealth was a shell game of credit, loans, and unpayable debts. The lawyers detailed the tax liens. The IRS demanded millions. The banks demanded millions. And then there were the silent debts, the shadow ledgers. The lawyers spoke in careful coded language. They mentioned outstanding obligations to private investors. They mentioned partners in Chicago and Las Vegas. They did not say the word Mafia. They did not have to. The diamonds Todd had placed on her fingers were not gifts. They were retaining fees. She realized the horrifying truth. She had to work to pay off the ghost's debts. If she stopped working, the money stopped flowing. If the money stopped flowing, the men in Chicago lost their return on investment. The crash in the Zuni Mountains proved they did not accept losses. The ransom contract. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer dispatched their fixers. These were men who wore sharp suits and possessed ruthless efficiency. They cleaned up messes. They buried scandals. They handled the delicate intersection of Hollywood business and underworld demands. They arrived at the Bel Air mansion and offered a solution. It was a solution designed to keep the cameras rolling and the mob satisfied. The studio would advance her money. They would rewrite her contract. They would handle the pressing creditors. They would negotiate with the men in the shadows. The studio acted as a massive corporate buffer. They paid the mob their cut through complex distribution deals and union kickbacks. In exchange, Taylor belonged entirely to the studio. She was indentured. She was a golden goose held captive in a gilded cage. Having no alternative, she accepted the terms and signed the new contracts, effectively binding herself to the machine. She agreed to shoot the films they demanded, smile for the press, and maintain the glamorous facade of the resilient widow. She traded her autonomy for physical safety. The studio system and the criminal syndicate were revealed to be a symbiotic organism. They fed on the same raw material. They fed on her fame. The scandal as camouflage. The psychological toll was devastating. The paranoia became permanent. She hired private security, but the security provided no comfort. She looked at the guards and wondered who paid their salaries. Did they work for the studio? Did they work for the outfit? Were they there to protect her or ensure she did not run? Sleep became impossible without chemicals. The nightmares were relentless. She dreamed of the falling plane. She dreamed of the ice on the wings. She dreamed of Todd trapped in the cabin screaming as the ground rushed up to meet him. The public saw only a grieving movie star. The press hounded her, camped outside gates, followed her cars, hid in bushes, and wrote endless speculation about a woman broken by fate. The studio kept her working. She finished Cat on a hot tin roof. The film was a massive success. The money rolled in. The studio collected profits. The silent partners in Chicago collected their percentages. The debt was being serviced. But the success offered no liberation. It only reinforced her value as an asset. She moved to one film after another. Her affair with Eddie Fisher exploded into global scandal. The media turned on her. The tragic widow became the seductress, the homewrecker, the sinner. The outrage was intense. But the scandal served a hidden purpose. It was a distraction. The media focused on the sex scandal. They stopped asking questions about Mike Todd. They stopped looking at the plane crash. The noise buried the truth. The Mafia preferred the noise. Cleopatra and the ransom money. 20th Century Fox approached her with an unprecedented offer. They wanted her to star in Cleopatra. They offered her $1 million. The public saw a record-breaking salary. It was not a victory. It was a ransom payment. The massive salary was necessary to satisfy the vast network of creditors pulling the strings behind the scenes. The studio needed a guaranteed blockbuster to keep the syndicate appeased. Taylor agreed. She moved to Rome. She thought the distance would provide safety. She thought an ocean would separate her from the men in Chicago. She did not understand the global reach of the organizations that controlled her industry. The production of Cleopatra became a legendary disaster. The set was chaotic. The budget spiraled out of control. The weather was terrible. The script was constantly rewritten. Then Taylor fell violently ill. The stress, the chemical dependency, and the relentless pressure broke her physical health. She developed a severe case of pneumonia. She was rushed to a hospital in London. She stopped breathing. The doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy. They cut a hole in her throat to force air into her lungs. She flatlined. They revived her. She survived again. The jagged scar on her neck became a permanent receipt. She looked at it every morning. It was a reminder that her body was merely a vessel for profit. When she finally returned to the Cleopatra set, the production was still hemorrhaging money. The quiet men in the background watched every dollar being spent. The delays were eating into criminal profit margins. She understood the mathematics. She had to finish the picture. She had to make it a success. She had to earn out the remaining debt left behind by her murdered husband. Richard Burton. Richard Burton became her armor. The Welsh actor was a phenomenal talent and a functional alcoholic. He possessed a booming voice and a violent, unpredictable temper. He did not care about studio executives. He did not care about budgets. He drank heavily and fought constantly. He was a human hurricane tearing through the rigid, controlled environment of the production. Taylor gravitated toward his chaos immediately. It was not a calculated romance. It was a tactical alliance. The syndicate operated in shadows and silence. They relied on discretion to execute their violence. Burton was pure, unadulterated noise. Their affair ignited a global firestorm. The paparazzi swarmed Rome. The Vatican condemned the relationship. Congress debated barring them from re-entering the United States. For the studio, it was a public relations nightmare. For Taylor, it was camouflage. She knew the mob could not touch a woman occupying the front page of every newspaper in the world. An engineered accident requires a lack of scrutiny. The paparazzi provided a relentless 24-hour security detail. Flashbulbs are effective deterrents for men who prefer to work in the dark. The men in Chicago could only watch. They hated the visibility. But they loved the profits. The scandal guaranteed every theater would be packed when the film opened. So they let her live. But they never let her forget. Anonymous gifts arrived at her hotel suites. Dead blackened roses were delivered to her dressing table. A strange mechanic inspected her car without being asked. A stranger at a casino in Monte Carlo casually mentioned how cold the winters were in the Zuni Mountains. These were surgical strikes against her sanity. They were reminders that the ghost of Mike Todd was still in the room. Negotiating the ransom. She reacted by increasing her demands. She realized that compliance had only made her a victim. She decided to become a mercenary. If she was going to generate millions for a criminal enterprise, she was going to extract an unprecedented fortune for herself. She renegotiated her contract. She demanded a flat fee of $1 million. She demanded 10% of the gross profits. She demanded script approval. She demanded director approval. The studio executives balked. She called their bluff. She knew they could not replace her. She knew the silent partners would not allow the production to shut down. The executives capitulated. Taylor became the highest-paid woman in the history of entertainment. The public saw a greedy, demanding diva. They did not see a hostage negotiating her own ransom. The massive influx of cash allowed her to build a financial fortress. She hired the most ruthless accountants and lawyers in the industry. She moved assets out of the United States. She purchased properties in Europe. She opened accounts in Switzerland. She was buying her freedom frame by frame. The ledger closes. Cleopatra premiered in 1963. It was a critical disappointment, but a massive commercial juggernaut. The public flocked to see the scandal on screen. The film generated staggering revenues. Fox recovered its investment. The mob received their laundered payouts. The massive debt incurred by Mike Todd was finally erased. The ledger was closed. But the closure brought no relief. The damage was permanent. Taylor had spent 5 years running from an invisible executioner. The adrenaline crash was devastating. She fell deeper into substance abuse. She relied on heavy painkillers to numb the physical ailments that plagued her. She relied on alcohol to numb the memories. Her marriage to Richard Burton became a volatile, destructive cycle of passionate reconciliation and violent screaming matches. They drank together. They fought together. They enabled each other's worst impulses. The landscape of organized crime also shifted. The federal government intensified scrutiny. Robert Kennedy targeted Giancana, Lansky, the unions, and the studio heads. The bosses retreated into the shadows to protect their core operations. Taylor seized the opportunity. She stopped working exclusively for the major studios. She formed her own production companies. She chose her own projects. She made Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She stripped away the pristine beauty that Todd had monetized and delivered a performance of terrifying authenticity. She won her second Academy Award. It was a victory won entirely on her own terms. The men who burned him. The 1970s changed everything. The old studio system cracked. The silent partners were dragged into harsher light. The power dynamics of the country shifted. Taylor was no longer a studio asset. She was an independent entity. She had amassed a fortune that rivaled the men who used to control her. But fear changes shape over time. It stops being a sudden spike of adrenaline and becomes a dull, permanent ache in the bones. She traveled with entourages. She moved between estates. She controlled guest lists, lighting, access, narrative. It was a desperate, lifelong attempt to keep the ground from falling away beneath her again. She numbed herself with alcohol and prescription painkillers. The public saw indulgence. they did not see untreated post-traumatic stress. Then the men behind the terror began to fall. On June 19, 1975, Sam Giancana was cooking sausages in the basement kitchen of his home in Oak Park, Illinois. He had recently returned from exile in Mexico. He was scheduled to testify before a Senate committee regarding Mafia involvement in political assassinations. The outfit could not risk his testimony. A trusted associate entered the basement. The associate raised a .22 caliber pistol equipped with a silencer. Giancana was shot once in the back of the head. He fell to the floor. The assassin then stood over the boss of the Chicago outfit and fired 6 more bullets directly into his face. It was a classic Mafia message. It was a permanent silencing. Elizabeth Taylor read the headlines over her morning coffee. The man who had likely ordered the sabotage of the Lucky Liz was dead on his own kitchen floor. She did not celebrate. She understood too much. Giancana was dead, but the machine he built continued to operate. Meyer Lansky outlived many of his peers, but he did not escape the consequences of his life. He fled indictments, sought asylum, was rejected, and died stripped of much of his power. Taylor outlived them all. Her survival became her final revenge. By the 1980s, Elizabeth Taylor had transformed the immense fame she had once used for survival into a force for public good, becoming one of the most fearless and visible advocates for AIDS research in the world. She had navigated a landscape of extreme violence, financial coercion, public humiliation, addiction, and private terror, and emerged as one of the most powerful women in the industry. Elizabeth Taylor passed away from congestive heart failure on March 23, 2011, at the age of 79, taking her deepest secrets to the grave and maintaining absolute control over her narrative until the very end. Today, the official Civil Aeronautics Board files still blame the ice for the crash of the Lucky Liz, while underworld lore continues to point to the Chicago outfit. The only undisputed truth remains the wreckage left behind by the violent collision between Hollywood's golden illusion and the dangerous reality of the men who financed it. This has been Elizabeth Taylor, Hollywood, the outfit, and the flight that burned the debt. A Pizzaverse Studios documentary. A Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. If you want more stories about the blood beneath the glamour, the hidden ledgers beneath the spotlight, and the violent machinery behind old Hollywood mythology, stay with the Pizzaverse. Because the cameras only ever show the shine. The real story lives in the smoke after the explosion. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. And thank you for being here while these stories are pulled apart, piece by piece. For every polished legend, every expensive lie, and every smiling icon standing on top of a hidden ledger, there is always value in dragging the darker truth into the light. Elizabeth Taylor. Sam Giancana.
A town where everyone's got a script and nobody's telling the truth. There's only one thing more powerful than talent: perception. You ever notice that, huh? Guy can't act, can't write, can't even hold a damn coffee cup, right? But somehow, He's the next big thing? Yeah, welcome to Hollywood, sweetheart. Introducing the Hollywood Reputation Rewrite. The only all-in-one system designed to turn your complete disaster of a career into an award-winning illusion. What's in the box? Oh, I'm glad you asked. The Crisis Vanisher Spray. Got a scandal? Spray it once. Boom. Now it's a misunderstanding. The Paparazzi Summoner app. You don't chase fame anymore. Fame chases you. Even if you're just picking up a latte looking like a bum. The method acting excuse kit. Acting weird? Rude? Completely out of your mind? Relax. You're not unstable. You're committed to the craft. The award season whisperer. Don't worry about performances. We got relationships. A few dinners, a couple favors. Next thing you know, you're crying on stage holding a statue you didn't earn. Beautiful thing. The image rebrand button. One click. You go from problematic train wreck to the Rey du Morteux, brave voice of a generation. Like magic. See, in this town, it ain't about what you did. It's about what people believe you did. So why leave your reputation to chance, huh? When you can control the narrative like a real professional. The Hollywood Reputation Rewrite. Because in Hollywood, the truth don't matter. But your publicist? Oh, that's everything. Side effects may include ego inflation, fake humility, sudden activism, mysterious accent changes, and an uncontrollable urge to thank your team. Hollywood, baby! Where even the lies got agents.
I don't reply by, please stop typing. I'm not in the mood, don't try me. Do I look pissed off, bitch? Cause I might be. Don't freak with me and my frequency, no decency. I got too many girls trying to freak my meat to be pressed over little Miss Minnie. Me? Bitch, pay me my damn respect. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. Call Taylor, I'ma need all hands on deck. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Come say something. Come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Good luck getting out alive. I don't like to play nice. I didn't mean to hurt you. I heard that all my life. Bitch, I got big dreams, pipe down. Talk shit, get psyched out. Ha. Look who's on the mic now. Not you, bitch, shut the fuck up. Bitch, pay me my damn respect. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. Call Taylor, I'ma need all hands on deck. Let him sweat, let him sweat, let him sweat. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. I'm not in the mood, come say something. Come say something, bitch, come say something. Come say something. kiss him.